Thanks for the 2.4 million, my sister said, laughing so hard the speaker on my phone distorted. You will not see a cent of it again. I said nothing. I sat on the floor of my new, empty apartment. The old refrigerator in the kitchen hummed a rattling, uneven rhythm. The sharp, metallic edge of my apartment key bit into my palm as I gripped it, and the smell of cheap, fresh paint hung heavy in the air. Are you even listening to me, Meredith? Kendra asked. At 39, I worked as a rehabilitation operations coordinator for the largest hospital system in Durham. I dealt with panic, denial, and crisis every single day, so I knew exactly how to stay quiet while someone else unraveled. I stared at the open laptop resting on the floorboards. My trust account portal was loaded on the screen. The balance read 0. I let her breathe heavily into the receiver for another 5 seconds, and then I ended the call. I did not panic. I simply looked closer at the screen. Right below that terrifying 0, a single word pulsed in gray text. Initiated. In the financial, I stood up, walked into the small bedroom, and opened the fireproof safe I had purchased 2 weeks ago. I pulled out a thick blue continuity binder. I sat on the edge of the mattress and flipped to the tab marked Trust. I found the printed email from 4 months ago. It was a confirmation from Ashford Trust Company. Enhanced verification was active on my account. I picked up my phone and dialed Ashford's after-hours fraud line. When the automated system prompted me, I left my name, my account number, and a clear statement that I had not authorized the transfer. Then I submitted the same notice through the secure portal and saved both confirmation numbers in my binder. Enhanced verification was already active, but I was not going to rely on a single safeguard. My phone buzzed against the mattress. A text message lit up the screen. It was not from my sister, it was from Mom. Do not upset your sister. She is finally fixing this family. I read the words 3 times. The glowing screen blurred for a second. I had spent the last 18 months cutting my hours at the hospital, managing Mom's medications, and taking her to physical therapy after her minor stroke. I had done everything right. And yet here she was, telling me to stay quiet while my sister robbed me. Mom was not an innocent bystander. She knew what Kendra was doing. I took a breath and forced the hurt down into a small, tight box in my chest. I took a screenshot of the message. I turned back to my laptop and exported a digital copy of the trust statement. I opened the blue binder to a blank page, uncapped my pen, and wrote down the exact time of Kendra's call and Mom's text. Then I opened my email and started a new message to Helena, my attorney. The subject line was just 2 words. It happened. I hit send, turned off the lights, and waited for morning. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting at my desk at the hospital. I had a full day of patient transfers and care plans to approve. I poured my first cup of coffee and opened my scheduling software. My phone started vibrating on the desk. Kendra. I let it ring. 3 minutes later, it vibrated again. I ignored it. I watched the caller ID flash until it finally went dark. A moment later, a voicemail notification popped up on the screen. I put my earpiece in, clicked the audio file, and listened. In the background, I could hear the faint sound of a morning talk show. It was the specific program Mom watched every single day at 8:15. Kendra was at Mom's house. Call me back, now. Kendra's voice shook. There was no triumphant laugh this time. She sounded breathless, like someone who had just missed a step in the dark. It was the sound of a woman who had just realized the door she thought was open was actually locked from the inside. Before I could replay the message, my phone rang again. This time, Helena's name appeared. I answered immediately. They put a hold on it, Helena said. She did not bother with a greeting. Ashford flagged the receiving account early this morning. The transfer is frozen. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since last night. Is the money safe? For now, Helena replied. The preliminary processing went through because the paperwork looked complete on the surface. But your enhanced verification triggered a senior review before the settlement phase. The trustee is going through the documents right now. I looked at the blue binder sitting on the corner of my desk. How did she do it, Helena? How did she activate the incapacity clause? She needs 2 medical certificates to prove I cannot manage my own finances. The trust officer is going to call you in about 5 minutes, Helena said, her tone perfectly even. I want you to listen to exactly what he says, take notes, and call me back. Do not call your sister. Do not call your mother. Helena hung up, and I barely had time to open a blank document on my computer before my phone rang for the 4th time that morning. Meredith Sloan, I answered. Miss Sloan, my name is Julian Price. I'm a senior trust officer at Ashford Trust Company. His voice was deep, careful, and entirely professional. I am calling regarding a highly irregular transfer request made on your account yesterday afternoon. I am listening, I said. Miss Sloan, can you confirm for me if you have ever been treated by a physician named Dr. Adrian Ellison? I frowned, typing the name into my document. No, I have never heard of him. I see, Julian said. I could hear the sound of papers shuffling on his end of the line. We received 2 medical certificates yesterday declaring you financially and cognitively incapacitated. One was from a clinic you visited several years ago. The second was signed by Dr. Ellison. My hands felt cold. Kendra had actually forged medical records. She had created a fictional doctor to steal my future. We also received the required family care representative designation, Julian continued, his voice dropping slightly in pitch. It named your sister, Kendra, as your sole financial proxy. Kendra does not have the authority to act as my proxy, I told him, keeping my voice as steady as I could. She does, under this specific filing, Julian replied. The temporary proxy form was uploaded along with the medical certificates. It was submitted with your mother's authenticated signature attached. I stopped typing. I pulled up the screenshot I had taken the night before. Do not upset your sister. She is finally fixing this family. I stared at the words, realizing just how much of a fool I had been. My sister had tried to drain $2.4 million from my name, but she had not done it alone. The mother I had spent the last 18 months caring for had handed her the key. 12 months before the phone call that ended my family, the theft started with a single piece of paper. I was standing in Mom's kitchen, separating her blood pressure medication into a plastic daily organizer. The sharp click of the plastic lids echoed in the quiet house. I had just finished helping her bathe, my scrub top still damp around the edges, when the front door swung open. Kendra walked in. She brought the smell of roasted espresso and expensive floral perfume into the sterile air of the living room. My sister wore a tailored navy blazer, her hair perfectly styled for a morning of client meetings. She did not take off her coat. She simply leaned over Mom's recliner, held up her phone, and snapped a picture of the 2 of them smiling. Look at us, Kendra said, typing rapidly on her screen. Just a quick visit to make sure my favorite lady is doing well before I show a property in Cary. Mom patted Kendra's hand, her limited mobility on her left side making the movement slow and deliberate. You work so hard, sweetheart. I do not know how you balance your career and your family. I snapped the Tuesday pill compartment shut. I had been awake since 4 a.m, managing a home care schedule, calling the insurance company to dispute a mobility aid charge, and preparing to leave for my part-time hospital shift. Mom did not mention my balance. She viewed my medical coordination job as flexible, something I could drop whenever she needed a glass of water. Kendra kissed Mom on the cheek and headed back toward the door. She paused by the kitchen island, tapping a manicured fingernail against a stack of mail. You should really go through this, Meredith, my sister said. Some of these look important. You have been letting things pile up lately. The front door clicked shut before I could answer. I wiped my hands on a towel and pulled the mail toward me. Near the bottom of the stack was a monthly statement from the family care account. This was the specific fund Ashford Trust permitted for Mom's medical reimbursements. I tore the envelope open. My eyes immediately caught a line item from 2 weeks prior. It was a reimbursement for $4,500, clearly marked as disbursed to Meredith Sloan for out-of-pocket care expenses. I pulled out my phone and opened my personal banking app. I checked my deposit history for the last month. The money was not there. That evening, I waited until Mom was settled in the living room with her tea before I brought the statement out. Kendra had stopped by to drop off groceries. I set the paper on the coffee table and pointed to the line item. I never received this, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Kendra barely glanced at the paper. She continued unpacking apples. You probably just forgot, Mur, or you transferred it to your savings and lost track. You know how disorganized you get when you are stressed. I did not forget $4,500, I replied. The money never hit my account. Mom sighed heavily from her recliner. The sound was thick with disappointment. Meredith, please do not start an argument over paperwork. Your sister handles the vendor payments. You have been so exhausted lately. You are just confusing things. I looked at Mom. Her eyes held genuine pity. I looked at Kendra. That practiced, effortless smile remained perfectly in place. They were not trying to find the missing money. They were trying to convince me I was losing my grip on reality. I did not argue. I picked up the statement, walked into my childhood bedroom, and closed the door. The next afternoon, I stopped at a local office supply store. I walked down the aisle, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and picked out a thick blue binder. I bought a set of plastic dividers and a pack of archival sheet protectors. When I got back to my room, I sat on the floor and clicked the heavy metal rings open. I created 5 tabs: care, trust, medical, messages, work. I slid the bank statement into the very first plastic sleeve. It was a small, quiet action, but it was the moment I stopped trying to be the perfect daughter and started building a defense. By December, the house felt smaller. The air inside grew stifling. The hospital offered me a weekend shift coordinating emergency intakes, and I took it just to breathe something other than the scent of Mom's lavender soap. When I put on my badge and uniform, Mom sat at the kitchen table and refused to look at me. I suppose the extra money is more important than your own mother, she said, stirring a cold cup of coffee. I hired a professional aide to sit with you for the next 4 hours, I told her, zipping up my jacket. I paid for it out of my own pocket. You have emergency contacts on the fridge, and the aide knows your medication routine. A stranger, Mom whispered, finally looking up. You are leaving me with a stranger. I walked out the door anyway. Walking onto the hospital floor felt like stepping into cold, clear water. The beeping monitors, the fast-paced triage decisions, the nurses calling my name. My former colleagues treated me like the competent professional I was. For 8 hours, I was not the exhausted, forgetful daughter. I was Meredith Sloan, operations coordinator, and I was excellent at my job. But the narrative at home was already changing. Kendra made sure of that. During a family dinner 2 weeks later, my aunt and uncle came over for roast chicken. We were sitting around the dining table when Kendra poured another glass of wine and let out a dramatic sigh. I just wish Meredith would slow down, Kendra told my aunt, using a hushed tone that was designed to be heard by everyone. She completely forgot to pay the electric bill last week, and yesterday she asked me the same question 3 times in 1 hour. My uncle frowned, looking at me with sudden concern. The electric bill had been delayed because Kendra had changed the login password on the care account and had not given me the new one. The repeated question was me asking her to confirm a physical therapy appointment she kept rescheduling. But sitting there under the dining room lights, none of the facts mattered. Kendra spoke with such deep, manufactured worry that my aunt reached over and patted my arm. Burnout is real, sweetheart, my aunt said softly. You need to let your sister help you more. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The way they called me tired was slowly turning into them calling me unstable. The final warning sign came on a rainy Tuesday morning in late May. I was folding towels in the laundry room when my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of a private psychology clinic I had visited nearly 4 years ago, shortly after Dad died. I had gone for a few sessions to manage grief and workplace stress. I answered the call. The receptionist sounded confused. Miss Sloan, she said. I am sorry to bother you. I am just calling to verify a records request we received this morning. A woman called asking for a copy of your burnout evaluation from our archives. She claimed to be your mother, Diane Sloan, but the authorization form she emailed was missing a witness signature. My hand gripped the edge of the washing machine. The metal was cold against my skin. My mother requested my psychiatric records? Yes, the receptionist replied. She provided your date of birth, your previous address, and the last 4 digits of your social security number to initiate the transfer. We just needed to verify. Cancel the request, I said, my voice dropping to a hard whisper. Do not release a single page. I will be submitting a formal privacy lock today. I ended the call and walked straight into the living room. Mom was watching television. Did you call my old clinic? I asked. Mom did not even blink. She shook her head too fast. What clinic? No, Meredith. Why would I do that? You are imagining things again. I looked at her hands resting on her lap. I looked at the hallway leading to her bedroom. The only place in this house that held my old address, my full medical history, and my social security number was the locked oak drawer of Mom's dresser. The same drawer Kendra had a key to. I did not argue. I turned around, went back to my room, and opened the blue binder. I wrote down the exact time of the clinic phone call. I knew then that they were not just making excuses for missing money. They were building a paper trail, and I was the target. The teller slid the fresh debit card across the polished mahogany counter. My name was the only one printed on the plastic. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering, feeling a strange, hollow sense of victory. I had spent the entire morning securing a private post office box, freezing my credit with all 3 major bureaus, and routing every piece of financial correspondence to a newly created email address. During the credit freeze process, a red security flag popped up on my laptop screen. Someone had recently attempted to add Kendra Sloan as a secondary contact on a utility account connected to Mom's property. The walls of my own life were slowly being painted over by my sister, and I needed professional help to strip the paint back. The law office of Helena Brooks smelled like lemon polish and old paper. She did not offer me false comfort or a warm cup of tea. She simply opened the blue continuity binder I pushed across her desk and began reading. We need to protect your identity and your assets immediately, the attorney said, her pen tapping a steady rhythm against the notepad. Helena drafted a formal revocation of all previous power of attorney documents. We sent a certified letter directly to Ashford Trust Company. At my request, we established a mandatory callback control on my trust portal. I chose a specific verbal password, a phrase only I knew that had to be spoken over a live phone line before any major transfer could clear the system. 2 months later, in the suffocating heat of July, I walked into the sterile waiting room of a clinical neurologist. The independent cognitive evaluation took 3 agonizing hours. I drew clock faces, repeated random word sequences, and answered deeply personal questions about my daily functioning and memory, earning a piece of paper that confirmed I was completely sane. Felt humiliating. A bitter pill I had to swallow, but I knew my family was building a case against my mind, and I needed a medical anchor rooted in absolute reality. I was also building a physical escape route. I signed a lease for a small ground-floor apartment 2 miles from the hospital. The rooms echoed when I walked through them, holding only a mattress on the floor, a second-hand wooden desk, and a ceramic coffee mug I had bought just for myself. I did not move out immediately because I still needed time to finalize a secure home healthcare plan for Mom, but I took the brass apartment key and slipped it into the hidden zippered pocket of my work bag. Mom once asked why I carried a random key around. I told her it was for a supply closet at the hospital. Before autumn arrived, I moved my original birth certificate, my passport, and my tax records into a bank safe deposit box. But I left one specific document in my bedroom drawer at Mom's house. It was a photocopy of that old stress evaluation from 4 years ago. Before sliding the paper into a plain folder, I uncapped a blue ballpoint pen. I pressed the tip against the margin right next to the printed date, letting the ink bleed into a tiny, distinct blue dot. At the bottom right corner, I scribbled a meaningless alphanumeric reference code. I pulled out my phone and took crystal clear, close-up photographs of both marks before locking the drawer. The trap sat untouched for weeks, until my sister came over for Sunday dinner. After serving dessert, Kendra excused herself to use the restroom down the hall. She was gone for over 10 minutes. When I went into my room later that evening, fresh silver scratches scarred the brass lock on my desk drawer. The blue-dotted photocopy was gone. Kendra found me in the kitchen washing dishes. She leaned against the granite counter, swirling the last of her red wine. Just out of curiosity, Kendra asked, keeping her tone conversational and light. When Ashford Trust needs to verify something with you, do they usually call or just send an email? They usually just email. I lied, keeping my focus on the soapy water. Kendra smiled, looking perfectly satisfied, and walked back into the living room. I dried my hands, picked up my phone, and texted Helena immediately to issue a preservation notice to the trust company. A few minutes later, I opened the security app on my phone to check the motion-activated camera I had discreetly installed near the front door. The recorded footage from earlier that evening played on my screen. I watched Kendra step out of my bedroom hallway, a thick folded paper clearly visible under her wool coat. Mom was standing right there in the foyer. The woman who raised me looked directly at the stolen document, looked up at Kendra's face, and simply turned her head away, letting her walk out the door. The transition plan required finding someone reliable to take my place. I interviewed a licensed home health aide on a Tuesday afternoon, arranging medication deliveries and scheduling transportation to the clinic. Mom sat in her recliner during the entire meeting, and her lips were pressed into a thin, pale line. "You are hiring a stranger to replace your own daughter," Mom said, right after the nurse walked out the door. I kept organizing the weekly pill boxes, placing them gently on the counter so they would not rattle. "I am setting up a system so you are never dependent on just one person for your safety." The real reason was that the hospital had officially offered me my full-time operations coordinator position back. I had accepted the offer that morning, setting a start date 2 months away to ensure the care handover was complete. Kendra heard about the promotion from Mom and immediately texted me, accusing me of running away from my responsibilities. That Friday, Mom invited our aunt and the family pastor over for a quiet dinner. The roasted chicken was barely touched before the real agenda began. Kendra placed her wine glass on the table and folded her hands. She adopted a tone of deep, manufactured sorrow. "We are all just so worried about you, Meredith. You are barely sleeping. You missed that therapy appointment last week. And Mom found out you opened a secret bank account and signed a lease for an apartment you never sleep in." My aunt leaned forward, her brow furrowed with concern. The pastor offered a sympathetic nod. My sister was taking isolated steps toward my independence and twisting them into a narrative of a mental breakdown. Kendra reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a stapled document. She pushed it across the table. "This is just a temporary protective measure. It allows Mom and me to assist with your medical and financial decisions until you are feeling like yourself again." I picked up the paper, reading the clauses carefully, and my chest tightened. The legal language granted them total control over my trust distributions, not just temporary assistance. "Send this to my email," I told Kendra, sliding the document back across the table. "I will review it later." "You need to sign it now, sweetheart," my aunt urged gently. I stood up from the table. "I will continue managing the household schedule until the professional care plan starts next month. But I will not sign over my passwords, my accounts, or my medical rights to anyone." Mom began to cry softly into her napkin. "You are abandoning me for your own ambition, Meredith." I did not apologize, and I did not sit back down. I walked out of the dining room and grabbed my coat. Kendra followed me into the dark hallway, cornering me near the front door. The sympathetic sister routine vanished completely. "You can sign willingly," Kendra whispered, her voice cold and flat in the shadows. "Or Mom can prove you cannot decide for yourself." I memorized the exact time on the grandfather clock behind her, stepped out the door, and got into my car. My attorney had specifically instructed me to avoid arguing and simply document every threat. Later that night, sitting in my quiet, empty apartment, my phone illuminated the darkness. An automated security alert from Ashford Trust Company appeared on the screen. Someone had just submitted an emergency request to change my phone verification number and add an external care account. The request claimed to be authorized by Diane Sloan. The fluorescent lights in the respiratory ward buzzed with a steady, irritating hum. I was standing at the nurse's station, coordinating a complex patient discharge, when my phone vibrated in my scrub pocket. It was not a standard text message flutter. It was the continuous, heavy pulse of an automated fraud alert. I pulled the device out and tapped the screen. An Ashford Trust Company notification filled the display. My portfolio status had just changed from active to liquidating. Panic is a luxury you cannot afford in a hospital, and I had learned to treat my own life with the same clinical detachment. I signed the patient release form, handed the plastic clipboard to the charge nurse, and walked into an empty conference room before locking the door behind me. I dialed the primary customer service number for the trust company. A representative answered on the second ring, her tone cheerfully oblivious to the disaster unfolding on my screen. She informed me that a family care representative had submitted an incapacity file earlier that morning. The documents had been accepted for preliminary processing, and a massive asset transfer was currently under review. "My name is Meredith Sloan," I told the representative, keeping my voice entirely level, "and the sky's falling in Carolina." That was the verbal password I had established with Helena months ago. The cheerful warmth vanished from the representative's voice instantly. The line went silent for several agonizing seconds. When the woman spoke again, her tone had shifted into rigid corporate caution. She noted that the caller who initiated the transfer an hour prior had failed to provide that specific phrase. The case was immediately escalated to a senior management review. Audit logs and lender records later showed what happened next. While I was in the hospital conference room, Kendra was at her real estate brokerage. She watched a massive pending credit appear in her newly established external account. Operating under a false sense of victory, Kendra immediately forwarded a screenshot of that pending balance to a commercial lender. She thought the money was secure, which prompted her to call me and laugh through my phone speaker. She did not realize the transfer was caught in the invisible net Helena and I had cast. That night, I slept on the floor mattress in my new apartment. The brass key rested on the nightstand right next to my blue continuity binder. My attorney had ordered a strict preservation hold, instructing me to ignore every attempt my family made to contact me. The silence in those empty rooms felt heavy, but it was the first time the quiet actually belonged to me. By dawn, Ashford had frozen the pending credit. Julian's follow-up call added the one fact I had not known when Kendra left that voicemail. The destination account named me on its cover page but gave her sole control, and she had already used the pending balance as proof of funds for a private townhome development. She was not merely trying to control my inheritance. She was using my medical identity to rescue a failing real estate deal. "Call the trustee and tell them the transfer is approved." The first voicemail sounded like a command from a corporate manager. An hour later, the tone shifted into something softer, something designed to sound reasonable. "Meredith, you have to understand, I am only trying to protect your assets from the market." By noon, the manufactured panic arrived. "If you let them investigate this, Mom is going to lose her house." I sat at my kitchen counter and let the audio play through the speaker. Listening to the evolution of a lie felt strange, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. My attorney instructed me to ignore every single call. Helena wanted all communication restricted to written formats. While my sister left frantic audio messages, my legal team gathered written denials. The physician from my old clinic signed a sworn statement confirming the final paragraph of my evaluation had been added after the fact. Dr. Ellison sent a formal letter verifying he had never met me in his life. The clinic locked their access logs and preserved the email request. I drove to the house that evening to pack the last of my clothes. The smell of lavender soap and old carpet felt suffocating the moment I stepped inside. The blue binder sat on the kitchen counter right next to a newly printed schedule. I handed Mom the professional home health aid contract, a fresh medication chart, and a transport service agreement. Mom sat perfectly still in her recliner. She did not reach for the papers. Her eyes locked onto the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "If you walk out that door, I will tell everyone you abandoned your mother right after a stroke," she warned, her voice dropping into a harsh whisper. I adjusted the strap of my bag. "You will be cared for. You will simply no longer control who provides that care." Kendra did not wait for morning to launch her retaliation. My phone started vibrating with text messages from cousins and aunts before I even unlocked my apartment door. According to the family group chat, I had suffered a complete mental collapse, locked away Mom's finances, and run away into the night. I read a message from my uncle asking if I needed a psychiatric intervention. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, tempted to unleash the entire truth. I put the phone down instead. I took screenshots of every accusation, printed them out, and snapped them into the blue binder. Silence proved stronger than arguing, and my aunt soon noticed a glaring inconsistency in the group chat. A woman experiencing a severe breakdown would not have prepaid a licensed nursing service for 6 months in advance. The financial puzzle pieces finally snapped into place later that week. Know Your Customer records from the receiving bank proved Kendra held sole signatory power over the destination account. The proof of funds package directly linked my trust money to a struggling townhome development project outside of Raleigh. My brother-in-law, Blake, was listed as a co-guarantor on the loan documents, yet his signature looked completely different on the final page compared to the first. They needed my inheritance to save a sinking real estate deal, and the frozen transfer was pushing them toward a massive default. That desperation produced the most valuable piece of evidence yet. An email from Kendra arrived late Thursday night. If you just call the trustee and confirm the transfer, I will give you half of the money back as soon as the project closes. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. She had put the reality of the situation in writing. My sister had openly admitted she viewed my inheritance as a fund she had the authority to divide and distribute. Helena called it a golden ticket for demonstrating fraudulent intent. The narrative of the caring sister trying to manage medical expenses completely shattered. I was drinking coffee the next morning, feeling the tight knot in my shoulders finally start to loosen. A heavy rhythmic knock sounded at my apartment door. A man in a beige windbreaker stood in the hallway holding a thick stack of manila envelopes. He asked for my name, handed over the papers without another word, and walked away down the corridor. I opened the top envelope. The heavy legal paper felt coarse against my fingers. It was a formal court petition demanding a temporary financial guardianship over my estate. The plaintiffs listed on the cover page were Kendra Sloan and Diane Sloan. They were asking a judge to freeze my life, citing paranoid behavior and a total abandonment of caregiving duties. Helena tossed the formal petition onto the polished mahogany surface of her desk, and the thick stack of legal paper landed with a heavy thud. The pages were filled with wild accusations, claiming I was suffering from severe paranoia and had completely abandoned my caregiving duties. I stared at the black text, feeling a familiar tightness creeping into my throat. My sister was using every single boundary I had set, from the apartment lease to the blue continuity binder, and twisting those actions into symptoms of a mental breakdown. This is just an allegation, Helena said, her tone steady and clinical as she opened a fresh legal pad. Filing a petition does not mean a judge believes a single word of it. We are going to build a timeline that proves every step you took was a rational response to their financial irregularities. 3 days later, I sat in a different waiting room, smelling the harsh scent of industrial bleach and old magazines. I had agreed to undergo a second, court-appointed cognitive evaluation. We needed a completely neutral doctor to evaluate my mind so Kendra could not accuse me of hiring a sympathetic physician. The process was agonizingly slow. I answered the same degrading questions about my memory, counted backward from 100, and explained my daily routines. When the independent evaluator finished, he did not just confirm my sanity. The doctor added a specific note to his final report, stating that meticulously documenting financial discrepancies in a binder was a highly organized, protective measure, not a symptom of a paranoid delusion. That piece of paper became the foundation of our defense. The facade on my sister's life began cracking late that same week. Helena called me back into her office to read an email forwarded by Blake's private attorney. The husband who had happily enjoyed the lavish lifestyle my sister provided was suddenly terrified of federal prison. His lawyer had warned him that his name on the commercial loan documents made him a participant in a financial crime, and a fraud conviction would destroy his chances in a custody battle over their 2 children. Blake formally denied any knowledge that the care account was being used as a proof of funds. He admitted his wife had pressured him to sign a backup financial package, but he claimed ignorance about the forged medical records. He was not acting like a hero. The man was simply trying to save himself, handing over emails and debt histories to protect his own future. While Blake's cowardice gave us leverage, the next piece of evidence nearly broke me. Because Kendra and Mom had filed a civil petition regarding my mental state, my legal team gained limited discovery access to their recent communications. Helena slid a printed transcript of text messages across the desk. I looked down at the highlighted lines exchanged between my mother and my sister on the exact morning the trust transfer was initiated. Use the old evaluation, Mom had written. It already says she was overwhelmed. I read the words again, my stomach turning over. The woman I had bathed, fed, and organized a life around, was actively coaching her youngest daughter on how to steal my inheritance. "Do not tell her until the money clears," the next message from Mom read. And then, 3 lines down, I found the moral justification that shattered 39 years of family history. "You have children," Mom had typed. "She does not need all of it." My throat burned. The coffee I had swallowed earlier turned entirely bitter in my stomach. Mom was not a confused, helpless victim, manipulated by a greedy child. She knew exactly what the plan entailed. The older woman truly believed Kendra deserved my money more simply because my sister had produced grandchildren, while my single, childless life was viewed as a permanent resource for the rest of them to mine. Mom demanded a meeting the following Tuesday. We met in a sterile assisted meeting room at her physical therapy clinic, with a staff nurse stationed just outside the glass door. She sat in her wheelchair, looking fragile, in a pale yellow sweater. When I sat down across the small laminate table, she immediately started to cry. The tears looked genuine, heavily fueled by fear, and the sudden realization that she was losing control of the narrative. "We can make this all go away, sweetheart," Mom whispered, reaching across the table with her good hand. "Kendra is terrified. Her broker is asking questions. She will drop the petition today, and I will tear up those awful papers. All you have to do is come back to the house, take over the schedule again, and promise not to push the criminal investigation." I looked at the hand resting near mine, remembering how many times that hand had smoothed my hair when I was a child. Then I remembered the text messages. I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the table. It contained the fully funded, long-term professional care plan I had arranged. "You will never be left alone," I told her, keeping my voice quiet so the nurse outside would not hear. "You will have transportation, medication management, and daily assistance. But I will not trade the truth just to play the role of your caregiver again." The tears vanished from my mother's eyes instantly. The fragile, weeping woman was replaced by someone cold and remarkably sharp. "If you do not help your sister," Mom warned, her voice dropping into a harsh, threatening register, "I will sit on that witness stand tomorrow morning and swear under oath that you have been losing your mind for a year. A judge will listen to a disabled mother over a spiteful daughter." I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of the clinic without saying goodbye. I knew in that moment that my family was truly gone, but I also knew they were going to lose the battle they had started. The afternoon before the civil hearing, I sat next to Helena in her office, scrolling through the digital inventory of documents Kendra's attorney had submitted to the court. We needed to prepare for every possible lie they would tell the judge the next morning. My eyes caught a specific file name on the monitor. It was the abbreviation of my old psychiatric clinic, followed by a date from 4 years ago. I leaned closer to the screen. I asked Helena to open the scanned PDF of the medical evaluation Kendra claimed to have obtained legally. The document loaded, displaying the forged conclusion at the bottom of the page. "Look at the margin," I told my attorney, pointing a shaking finger at the left side of the screen right next to the date. Helena frowned, adjusting her glasses. "It looks like a printing smudge." "It is not a smudge," I explained, pulling out my cell phone. "And the alphanumeric code in the bottom right corner is completely fake. I wrote that code, and I made that dot with a blue ballpoint pen right before I locked the photocopy inside my bedroom desk drawer at Mom's house. Kendra stole this specific piece of paper from my bedroom." Helena stopped breathing for a second. The attorney immediately picked up her phone and dialed the forensic team at Ashford Trust Company. I showed her the crystal-clear, close-up photographs I had taken of the marked document months ago, right before the paper vanished from my room. We waited in silence for 45 minutes while the trust analysts zoomed in on the high-resolution scan Kendra had uploaded to the portal. Helena's phone finally buzzed. She read the incoming message, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. The forensic team confirmed the blue ink bleed and the fake reference code were exact matches. For the first time since this nightmare began, we could definitively link the forged documents filed in the court system directly to a theft committed inside my own bedroom. The December air bit into my face as I walked up the courthouse steps. My navy wool coat offered little protection against the morning chill. For the first time in 18 months, my hospital identification badge rested inside my purse instead of clipped to a pair of scrubs. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, determined to look exactly like the competent operations coordinator I was. Today required armor, and professional competence was the strongest shield I possessed. Pushing through the heavy oak doors of the hearing room, the murmur of hushed voices greeted me. Kendra sat at the petitioner table. My sister wore an understated beige dress, one hand resting gently over Mom's trembling fingers. Several aunts and a few cousins occupied the gallery benches behind them. Their eyes tracked my every movement, filled with the manufactured pity Kendra had carefully cultivated over the last year. I took my seat next to Helena Brooks and focused entirely on the polished wood of the defense table. Opposing counsel stood, adjusting his suit jacket before addressing the judge. He painted a picture of a grieving, exhausted woman crumbling under the weight of caregiving. According to his narrative, hiding a secret apartment, refusing to answer phone calls, and obsessively organizing financial receipts were undeniable symptoms of a paranoid collapse. He claimed the external care account existed merely to protect family assets from my erratic decisions. Mom offered a tearful nod, confirming her signed affidavit that declared her eldest daughter mentally unstable. Helena did not display an ounce of sympathy. The attorney stood and began handing exhibits to the clerk. She presented the full-time job offer from the hospital, pristine attendance records, and a signed residential lease paid from a private, separate bank account. Then came the medical anchors. Helena submitted 2 independent cognitive evaluations, both declaring my mind completely sound. The court-appointed evaluator had even added a specific addendum, stating that my meticulous record-keeping was a rational response to financial irregularities. The absolute ruin of their argument came with the comprehensive professional care plan. My legal team proved Mom had never been left alone for a single hour. The helpless victim narrative evaporated into the stale courtroom air, replaced by the reality of a highly organized, independent adult. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he reviewed the towering stack of documents. He asked Kendra's attorney to explain the glaring discrepancy between my recent evaluations and the incapacity certificates submitted to the trust company. Helena answered the question before opposing counsel could formulate a lie. She introduced the sworn denials from my old clinic and Dr. Ellison. The opposing lawyer attempted to object, citing clerical errors and misunderstandings. My attorney simply smiled, a cold, sharp expression that promised absolute defeat. She asked the clerk to project the high-resolution scan of the old psychiatric evaluation onto the courtroom monitor. Next to it, she placed the photograph I had taken months ago inside my childhood bedroom. "Your Honor, please direct your attention to the left margin," Helena instructed, her voice ringing clearly across the room. The forensic zoom clearly displayed the tiny blue ink bleed right next to the date. Then, she pointed to the bottom right corner. And this alphanumeric code was created by my client specifically to track this piece of paper. The room grew incredibly quiet. Kendra shifted in her chair, her beige dress suddenly looking much too tight around the collar. The digital metadata report confirmed the file had been modified on a device registered to my sister's real estate firm. The document had not been legally obtained through a clinic request. It had been stolen from a locked drawer inside my bedroom and altered to steal a fortune. Julian Price took the stand next, bringing the full weight of the Ashford Trust Company with him. The senior trust officer detailed the portal logs, the failed verbal password callback, and the true nature of the receiving account. He produced the commercial banking records, proving the destination account bore my name on the cover, but Kendra maintained sole signatory control. Julian then displayed the proof of funds package for the failing townhome development. Kendra's lawyers scrambled, desperately arguing that his client intended to hold the money safely until my supposed crisis passed. Helena destroyed that final defense with a single printed email. She read my sister's own words into the record, emphasizing the promise to give me half the money back once the real estate project closed. "You do not offer to split an inheritance you are merely protecting." The pristine image of a united, concerned family shattered completely. Mom pulled her hand away from Kendra, her wheelchair squeaking loudly in the tense silence. "She told me everything was legal," Mom stammered, looking frantically between the judge and the gallery. Kendra said the trust allowed a temporary transfer to keep the money safe. Helena did not let the older woman play the victim. My attorney presented the text messages obtained through discovery. She read the words aloud, letting them hang in the air. Do not tell her until the money clears. The instruction echoed in the courtroom, stripping away every ounce of plausible deniability from the woman who had raised me. Kendra turned on Mom with terrifying speed. You signed the proxy, Mother. You told me to use the old evaluation because you wanted that money secured for your grandchildren. They argued right there at the petitioner table, their voices rising in a desperate bid to shift the blame onto each other. Cousins in the gallery whispered furiously, their faces pale with shock. The intervention they had staged to lock me away had transformed into a public autopsy of their own greed. The two women who had plotted to steal my future were now tearing each other apart to avoid the consequences. The judge slammed his wooden gavel, demanding immediate order. His decision was swift and devoid of any flowery lectures. He denied the petition for guardianship entirely. He permanently removed both Kendra and Diane Sloan from any roles related to my trust. An independent fiduciary would immediately assume control over Mom's medical care accounts. Finally, the judge formally referred the forged documents to the district attorney for a criminal fraud investigation. I gathered my purse, feeling an exhausting, hollow relief wash over my shoulders. The grueling battle was over. The trust was safe, and my freedom was legally secured. We turned to leave, ready to walk out the swinging wooden doors and breathe the cold winter air. Julian Price approached our table before we could take 3 steps. The trust officer carried a thin manila folder, his expression grave. He placed a printed spreadsheet down on the polished wood right in front of me. The massive transfer failed, Julian said softly, tapping a finger against a long column of numbers. These did not. I scanned the rows of transactions stretching back 3 entire years. Small care reimbursements, vendor payments, and medical supply charges had been steadily siphoned off long before Mom ever suffered her stroke. The total amount stolen exceeded $180,000. The printed spreadsheet rested on the polished wood of the defense table, its long columns of numbers quietly destroying the last remaining illusion of my family. Julian Price did not need to explain the math. The senior trust officer had just handed over the map to a 3-year pattern of calculated theft. Forensic accountants spent the first 4 months of the new year tracing every phantom invoice and inflated medical receipt. The investigation expanded far beyond the failed trust transfer. My sister had established a fictitious vendor shell company specifically to capture Mom's care reimbursements. Those stolen funds had paid for luxury car leases, glossy marketing campaigns, and massive interest penalties on failing commercial properties. Ashford Trust Company formally acknowledged their preliminary oversight gaps and agreed to shoulder the heavy financial burden of the forensic audit. The consequences rippled outward, striking the carefully curated life Kendra had built. Notice of the criminal fraud investigation eventually reached her real estate brokerage. Her managing broker did not wait for a conviction to protect the firm. He suspended Kendra from the brokerage, removed her from all active listings, and replaced her on a major commercial transaction. The deal collapsed the following week, while the state licensing authority opened its own disciplinary review. Stripped of her professional identity, my sister resorted to the only platform she still controlled. She posted vague, emotionally charged updates on her social media pages. The updates spoke of enduring malicious attacks from jealous relatives and facing unprovoked betrayal. I read the screenshots Helena forwarded, amazed at the sheer resilience of her victim complex. While Kendra typed defiant messages online, her husband watched the walls closing in around his own life. Blake retained a private criminal defense attorney right after the civil hearing. His lawyer delivered a brutal reality check regarding the proof of funds package. The paperwork bore his name and credit history. If Blake continued concealing documents after learning about the forgery, prosecutors could treat him as a knowing participant in the fraud. An indictment would also severely damage his position in any custody dispute over their 8-year-old daughter and 5-year-old son. Fear proved significantly stronger than marital loyalty. Blake authorized his attorney to surrender a mountain of digital evidence to the investigators. He handed over frantic email threads regarding their insurmountable debt. He provided the original drafted loan applications where Kendra had blatantly forged his signature. He was not acting out of a sudden surge of moral clarity. He simply recognized a sinking ship and scrambled for a lifeboat. The following morning, Blake packed his bags, secured the children in his vehicle, and filed formal separation papers at the county courthouse. A profound shift also occurred inside the house where I grew up. The court-appointed fiduciary assumed total, immediate control over the medical care account. A neutral accountant now reviewed every grocery receipt, approved every utility payment, and paid the professional nursing staff directly. The financial well had completely dried up. Without access to the checking ledger, my sister stopped visiting. I stopped by on a rainy Tuesday afternoon to drop off some approved medical supplies. Mom sat in her recliner, staring blankly at a muted television screen. The silence in the living room felt heavy and absolute. The woman who raised me had finally realized that her golden child only showed up when the money flowed freely. Mom had recently signed a formal withdrawal of her false affidavit, cooperating with the investigators to secure a lighter liability classification for herself. Yet, the lifelong habit of protecting my sister remained deeply entrenched in her mind. "Put in a good word for her with the prosecutor, Meredith," Mom pleaded, her voice trembling as she gripped the armrests of her chair. "She made a mistake, but she is still your sister. You have to help her." I set the box of supplies on the kitchen counter. Her choices put her in this position. My silence will not save her from the consequences. Spring dissolved into the suffocating humidity of early summer. The district attorney constructed a devastating plea agreement. The case centered on felony forgery, identity-based fraud, attempted theft of the trust assets, and the completed thefts hidden inside the older care reimbursements. The plea required a custodial sentence followed by supervised probation, full restitution for the completed thefts, and a permanent ban on serving as anyone's financial proxy or fiduciary. Her defense attorney requested a final mediation meeting before the deadline to accept the plea. Helena and I sat in a sterile conference room in downtown Raleigh. The digital connection hummed softly as the video monitor flared to life. Kendra appeared on the screen, sitting beside her lawyer. The expensive blowouts and tailored blazers were gone, replaced by a dark, unadorned sweater and exhausted eyes. She leaned closer to the camera, attempting to bypass the attorneys entirely. "Are you really going to let them destroy my life over money?" Kendra asked. Her voice cracked, weaponizing the very real pain of her situation. "Think about your niece and nephew. They are going to lose their mother because you are too stubborn to ask for leniency." The guilt tried to anchor itself in my chest, a reflex drilled into me since childhood. I looked at the woman on the screen, recognizing the final, desperate manipulation tactic. "This was never about the money," I told her, my voice remarkably steady. "You used my exhaustion as a weapon. You tried to legally erase my ability to govern my own life. You are not losing your family because of my stubbornness. You are losing them because you believed you owned us." Kendra's face hardened, the sorrow instantly evaporating into bitter rage. "You always hated me. I am going to stand up at sentencing and tell the judge exactly how jealous you have always been." The video feed abruptly cut out, leaving a black screen reflecting the fluorescent lights of the conference room. Helena closed her legal pad, confirming we had absolutely nothing left to discuss. The district attorney formally invited me to deliver a victim impact statement at the upcoming hearing. The 26th of June arrived, bringing a thick, oppressive heat to the city. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. Kendra sat at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly together. When I passed the wooden partition, she looked up. Her eyes searched my face, desperately looking for the protective older sister who had always stepped in to fix the broken pieces of the family. I walked past her without breaking my stride. The bailiff called my name. I stepped up to the wooden podium, adjusting the microphone until it hummed with low feedback. I unclasped my leather portfolio and looked down at the single sheet of paper resting on the slanted wood. The courtroom grew entirely silent, waiting for the first sentence. I kept my statement brief. I did not ask the judge for the maximum possible sentence, nor did I plead for mercy. I simply spoke the truth. I explained that this ordeal was never merely about the $2,400,000 Kendra attempted to steal. It was about the calculated way she weaponized my temporary exhaustion to strip away my autonomy and define my life without my consent. My silence on the phone that first night was not agreement. It was the exact moment I finally stopped saving my sister from the consequences of her own choices. The judge accepted the plea agreement without delay. Kendra received a period of actual incarceration, followed by several years of supervised probation. The criminal sentence ordered full restitution for the completed thefts and documented financial losses. A separate civil judgment made her responsible for my recoverable legal fees and the direct damage caused by the fraud. A permanent order forbade her from acting as a financial proxy or fiduciary for anyone vulnerable in the future. Licensing boards later suspended her real estate credentials, following their own independent review of the fraudulent filings. Watching the bailiff lead Kendra away, the heavy knot in my chest loosened for the final time. She had already lost her home and her car to the debts she created, not because I took them, but because the foundation of her life had been built on a lie. Blake continued the separation process, maintaining strict boundaries to protect their 2 children from the wreckage. My mother moved into a managed assisted living facility suitable for her physical needs. I visited her on a scheduled basis, keeping the interactions polite but distant. Diane always apologized during these visits, though she inevitably reverted to her old refrain about just wanting to keep the family together. I listened, nodded, but never offered the absolution she craved. One afternoon, Mom asked the question that had defined our relationship for my entire adult life. "When are you coming home, Meredith?" I looked at the brass apartment key resting in my palm. The metal felt warm and solid, a weight that belonged to me and no one else. "I am home," I said, and for the first time in 39 years, the words were not a lie. I walked out of the facility, leaving the old guilt behind in the lobby. My career at the hospital flourished, fueled by competence rather than sacrifice. When the lease on the temporary apartment ended, I purchased a townhouse with my own earnings, ensuring I never relied on trust distributions for basic survival. The blue continuity binder now sat on a bookshelf in my home office, not hidden in a safe, but resting in plain sight as a record of a chapter finally closed. It was a quiet morning in July, 2026. Humidity hung thick over the neighborhood, but the kitchen felt cool. I poured a cup of coffee and watched the sunlight hit the polished wood of my dining table. A notification appeared on my phone, an old voicemail from my sister. I did not listen. I tapped the icon and deleted the file forever. I set the key on the table, opened the front door to let the light pour into my hallway, and prepared for my day. Kendra had been wrong about one thing. The $2.4 million had never become hers. But by then, the money was no longer the most valuable thing I had taken back. I locked the door behind me, not because I was shutting my family out, but because, for the first time in my life, I was the one who decided who could come in. If you find yourself carrying the weight of a family that only values what you provide, you must understand that setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, but an act of survival. You have been taught that being useful is the only way to earn your place at the table, but you need to realize that your value as a person exists entirely apart from your ability to serve, fix, or fund the lives of others. When you start demanding the respect you deserve, you will inevitably be labeled as difficult, ungrateful, or cold. But you must keep your records, document your boundaries, and protect your own future with the same intensity you once used to protect them. You are not a resource to be mined until you are empty. You are the architect of your own peace, and you have every right to decide who is allowed to enter your life and on what terms. True family does not force you to choose between your own stability and their demands. And if they only stay in your life as long as they can control your assets, then they were never truly part of your foundation in the first place. Have you ever felt that you were being loved only for what you could do for others? And what is one small boundary you can start enforcing today to reclaim your autonomy?